welcome to all of you who are watching, and it's such a privilege to be here presenting a digital program that reflects back on the beginning of this company, with Farouk and I starting the company together with few dancers, and following this journey all the way to the present. One of the things that I feel very strongly about today, and have felt strongly for the last 10 years at least, is the notion of silence. And for a long time through my education within an Indian classical dance context and within my community, Bangladeshi community, I felt I've always been silent. Particularly because I was perhaps younger than most people in that community, and also because it's not really in our nature to question or to use our voice, to share our opinions so freely within the culture that I grew up in. And so this was burning inside me for many years. And it was not until I had the company with Farouk and until we went on a journey, and over these years, the silence was burning within me. And I felt strongly, especially now, that we cannot be silent anymore. And I mean that metaphorically in many areas, in many layers, not just in my personal experience of my dance journey, but also politically, socially, religiously, economically. And I have to say, I and the AKC, we are privileged. We're in a privileged position to be able to even have the opportunity to share this online. So, please accept my suggestion that we must not be silent anymore.
দেশের মাটি তোমার পরে ঠেকাই মাথা তোমাতে বিশ্বময়ীর তোমাতে বিশ্বমায়ের আঁচল পাতা ও আমার দেশের মাটি তোমার পরে ঠেকাই মাথা ও আমার দেশের মাটি তোমার পরে ঠেকাই মাথা তোমাতে বিশ্বময়ী তোমাতে বিশ্ব মায়ের আঁচল পাতা ও আমার দেশের মাটি তোমার পরে ঠেকাই মাথা দেশের মাটি তোমার পরে ঠেকাই মাথা
One of the first moments I remember when we met was an energy about you that was something I had not experienced with other people. It was one that was full of hunger. Most people I met who were kind of being introduced to me at that time were usually all-knowing. So they were not that hungry. And somehow they had the answers already.
Right.
Whereas when I met you for the first time, I felt this real energy of hunger and what can we do together? Let's do something together.
Yeah.
And that was that was the first time out of everyone I met previous to that really surprised me, and I thought, this is where I want to be with this person.
Right.
But the person who introduced us, I think, is Jonathan Burrows.
Jonathan Burrows, that's right, yeah. Well, look, I think that, you know what I think? I remember that feeling completely, and it was just like, we didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And I think this hunger, I remember what I felt about you was just like, this person is so curious.
Yeah.
This person is kind of a learning machine, do you know what I mean? And also, I think, there was this kind of quiet determination and strength about you. And it's not like, we're two brown boys and we were going to work together. There was something deeper, but I think like all those things that you can't put a finger on, but you know something strong is happening. And
It was a feeling. Yeah.
It's a feeling, yeah. And I went away after watching you at the South Bank. I think you were with Jonathan Burrows and that Kevin Bowden's evening, July the 3rd, 1999, just so checking my memory. And then I just I wanted to know more about you.
Yeah.
I remember, and then I came to see you and Mavin at No Male Egos at the Purcell Room.
Yeah.
But I actually when I really felt I knew you.
Yeah.
Because I was curious about you, and you were a bit like an enigma.
Yeah.
Was when you did Loose in Flight at a new British Dance Edition in Newcastle.
Yeah.
And that, I feel I knew you.
Yeah.
I knew where you were coming from.
Because that was my voice. Yeah.
That was your voice.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember straight after that, that's what triggered our relationship further.
Well, I cried that day,
Yeah.
because you really moved me, because I kind of got a hint of you before, and I knew we were like getting to know each other, and there was a kind of chemistry growing. But that moment, I got to know you, and I think at that moment I felt like I knew what we could do together.
Yeah, and it was funny, because straight after the show, short performance, there was a line of producers queuing up, and they were asking me, so who do I need to speak to? And I turned to you.
Yeah.
And I said, and you said, yeah, let's do it.
Well, what it was is that you did the show. I was like completely dumbstruck by what you just done and how you moved me. And then I turned around, there was like 100 of these presenters with their business cards. Says, I want this artist, I want this artist. And it was like overwhelming, but a real thrill. What vision did we start with? To tell you the truth, we didn't have one.
No.
I think we were just too naive and too kind of ambitious, and we know we wanted to go somewhere. We didn't know where it was, but we were looking forward to getting there. That kind of feeling. Yeah. And I remember, when we started talking about each other, and I think the vision was the chemistry. Yeah. That we would learn together. Yeah. That we would go on this journey and we would take risks together.
And the trust in that.
And absolutely trust.
The blind trust that we had.
Totally.
We were going to hold hands and we would go on this journey. Even if we didn't know where the destination was.
Absolutely. And I think that really helped us in an interesting way. That not being so certain always has kind of shaped the energy of this company, not defining things and not like
the
knowing
end goal.
Not having a goal.
Not defining the end goal.
Yeah. And you know what, actually? What was that really interesting experiment when we started the company and we met Gerard Lemos, who was our first chair. Absolutely, and he took us in the office and he said, like, okay, he asked us, what's your vision? And we both said, I have no idea, right? So then he said, well, write down all the things that can happen to you as a dance company on his blackboard in his office, right? So we said, we would do commissions, outreach, education, and there was all this stuff that dance companies do. Yeah. And then he said to us, right, he goes, right, now cross out the things you don't want to do. Yeah. So we were just crossing all this stuff out, and we were left with three things, which was artist-to-artist collaborations, solo katak work, and ensemble work. Yeah. And that was the vision. Yeah. The vision was almost like a piece of clay. You took away the bits you didn't need, and there it was.
It revealed itself. Yeah. I remember very much when we started and as we developed the company together, that there were this thing that we became conscious of through the process. It was pretty early. Yeah. It was sometime around between 2000 and 2005. It wasn't definitely in 2000, it was later, towards 2005. And that was that we wanted to burst, it's very surreal that I'm using the word bubble, but we wanted to burst these bubbles that we were conscious of. Yeah. And these bubbles were social bubbles. These bubbles were cultural bubbles. Right. These bubbles were religious bubbles. Yeah. And we wanted to transcend those bubbles. We wanted to transcend. We didn't want to make work specifically just for our community. We didn't want to make work just for the British community or Indian community. We didn't want to make work for a particular religious community or contemporary dance community. Yeah. We were very early on, subconsciously, in our DNA, we were making choices that were wanting to reach a more universal space, where it was open. It wasn't just for the high elite, let's say, contemporary audience. It was for everyone.
I tell you what, absolutely. And in a way, it kind of aligns itself with the idea of not deciding a vision. Yeah. And I think that, I do remember that we very consciously said we weren't going to call ourselves South Asian. Yeah. Because at the beginning, as we felt like if we did that, that would almost trap us in a cage. Yeah. And now...
And trap us in a cage from, let's say, predominantly a white perspective.
Absolutely, yeah. And that meant we could have been stuck in that place forever as we move forward. And that was a really important moment of liberating ourselves. But you know what? I don't even think when it comes to representation and identity, we were so instinctive about it. Yeah. We didn't really sit down and kind of intellectually and academically or, emotionally conceptualize it. It was something so innate in both of us. Yeah. This need that we've spent our whole lives
Yeah.
moving between different spaces,
Yeah.
and that's what makes us who we are. And not letting that suddenly become putting that in a space and then fixing it.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And
no.
also one of the things that we were conscious of is we wanted equality
Truly.
in our voice, because we didn't want to be, we felt that being regarded just within the South Asian would separate us in terms of equality.
Absolutely.
Of how, who comes to see it, what kind of, how we're perceived. And I remember that call that I had with you straight after calling Pina Bausch.
Yeah, I was thinking of that one
Because
actually.
Pina,
Yeah.
who we're both huge admirers and have huge respect for, had called me when I was in America touring, and we spoke for, I think, almost 2 hours, debating on the fact that I was unhappy to be part of a festival if we were going to be within a South Asian weekend.
Yeah, an
Which-
India festival.
an India
wasn't it?
festival,
That was
sorry,
it.
that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And I said, I wanted to be part of the festival. I didn't want you to focus or put me in a particular, put us in a particular space
Yeah.
that is conditioned and the rules are met by you. I wanted us to feel a sense of equality with our voice as to other contemporary artists.
You know what? Actually, when I think of that, so that's 2000. This is the work Ma, right?
Yes.
So we are now talking about
2003.
autumn 2004,
Four.
because or something like this. I think, yeah. So Ma actually premiered in 2004. If you think we're just 4 years, we're stumbling around like babies at
Yeah.
this moment. We've just barely grown up, right? That takes a lot of courage to say that to Pina.
Yeah, that was.
Do you know what I mean? And to defend that principle, it's
Yeah.
such an important part of the career.
Yeah.
And that now thinks of a really important quality that has taken us to where we are today, the courage of our convictions.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing that even if you don't know,
Yeah.
even if you're against the heavyweights
Yeah.
and you're standing there and they're towering over you,
Yeah,
like
but,
thinking,
the courage and confidence in our instincts.
well, there you go. Absolutely.
We trusted our instincts rather
Yeah.
than something that you could see.
Totally.
I'm sure you remember the Olympic opening ceremony in 2012 shifted our exposure from not just the arts world, but from the arts world into a much bigger world.
Totally.
Because I remember the event, I remember doing it and then looking back straight after and going, this is not just a cultural event. This is an educational event.
Yeah.
It's educational because the people who would usually see the Olympic opening ceremony, not all of them, the majority of them are not culturally active, let's say, or interested in dance, let's say, contemporary dance, let alone a South Asian choreographer leading it.
Yeah.
So that opportunity, I felt, brought us to a much, much wider audience that are not dance lovers necessarily.
I mean, you're talking about 2 billion people.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, and it's a shame that not 2 billion people love dance in the world. We'd be
Yeah.
a lot happier. But it was such a defining moment,
Yeah.
right, the Olympic Games, you know. And I remember when Danny Boyle was in the foyer of Vertical Road, and I knew, I know why he's here. He's
Did you?
scouting for choreographers to do the
Yeah.
Olympics, because he got to be the director.
Of course,
and
yeah.
then it's this kind of big, epic event, you know. And it was terrifying, remember, because
Yeah.
what we were dealing with, you know, 5 minutes piece.
Yeah.
You only do it once.
Yeah.
You don't know what the weather's going to be like.
Yeah.
You've got 2 billion people watching
Yeah.
you.
You get it wrong.
You
2
get it
billion
wrong,
people
and
will
you
remember
connect
it.
2 billion
You can't
people.
edit it.
And
Yeah.
it was like, but I mean, and also, if you remember rightly, that was
was
your
injured.
first performance after rupturing your Achilles
Yeah,
tendon.
that's right.
And I remember this guy is going on stage
Yeah.
after 6 months off in front of 2 billion
Yeah.
people. So it was kind of epic.
Yeah. It was not just educational or cultural, it was political.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what? And also another thing I remember really explicitly from that thing was when you were rehearsing it, and I can't remember the British politician, and I won't name names if I
Yeah,
did, but
yeah.
anyway, he says, what has this got to do with modern Britain?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and you know, and then you kind of realize actually there's another implication
Yeah.
about what it represents
Yeah.
as a cultural shift
Yeah.
in the thinking of the nation.
Yeah, I remember we were in where not in the stadium, but we were removed from it where all the creatives were.
Yeah, yeah.
And the rehearsal was going on, and I was standing there, and Danny was close to me, and this politician came in and made that comment. And you said it politely. I think it was slightly harsher than that.
Really?
Yeah, quite racist, I have
yeah.
to say. And it was a moment where I was so shocked.
Yeah,
and Danny
absolutely.
defended it and said, "This is modern Britain."
This is modern Britain, absolutely. I think for the first 10 years, we were just building our craft, finding our voice. You know, and it made me realize that also as a producer, I had to find a voice as well. I mean, you were searching for your voice and refining your voice and stuff. And then there was a tricky bit. You know, we had a tricky bit, didn't we? After, you know, and I think that's a natural thing because we've been changing. And sometimes we don't know those changes because we see each other every single day. And we found ourselves in a space where we had grown into something different. And I must say, personally, it was difficult, you know, because, you know, to accept change and even though it had been happening. And so we were then, for a long time, we were converging, and then I kind of felt then we kind of started to diverge a little bit. But I think it's just such a beautiful thing as well, because that was a little painful period. But it's allowed us to arrive now with another very distinctive voice and identity, you know. And I feel like I appreciate your work in a completely different way than I would have done. I was more of a, let's say, with all due respect, I was probably more of a cheerleader in the first part because I'm part of it.
Yeah.
And now I'm watching it in a very different, with a different lens and a more kind of, in a more contextualized sense of where it sits. And I see nuances and depth in you and the work. And I see your growth in a completely, you know, an extraordinary way. So, yeah, I'm 20 years on. It still doesn't feel like we're tired of each other, right? But we've changed.
Yeah, and I think change, you're so right, absolutely. I mean, change is always violent, but when change happens, it's always a blessing because it gives you a renewed sense of questioning what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so you have to re-question what you're doing and have you moved? If change doesn't happen, that means we've not moved and we suddenly go into automatic mode. And we're driving down and we think everything is hunky-dory. So rupture is important. But I think to add to that, one of the things I felt was when we first started, I have to be honest, because you are several years older than me, you had much more experience of the arts sector than I did. I predominantly performed in, small events, really. And so in a sense, you were a mentor.
Right.
Definitely for those first few years, you were definitely a mentor. And still are, in many respects. But in that stage, it's always that father, son, or older brother and younger brother syndrome. Where the younger brother feels, okay, now when am I going to be, now I want to be myself. You know, I don't want to hold hands. And so it was a real shift. And now we found a way where we are friends.
It also sums up the journey that, you know, we've never gone in a straight line, have we?
No.
We've gone round in circles, we've walked off in different directions, but we're still on the same road.
Yeah.
And that is a testament
Which
to
is
the strength.
We want to explore new stories.
Totally,
Stories that are in the shadow.
Yeah.
And to its excellence.
Yeah.
That is something the core belief that we've always had. That first moment we met and that feeling laid the foundation. So even though we did go our own ways, the important thing is not that we gave up. We came back.
No, we never gave up.
Yeah.
That's a very good strength of ours.
Yeah.
You know that? We don't give up.
Yeah. It's really much easier to talk about the past than it is about the present and the future. Especially in this time and age. But my feeling is to continue together to persevere for work that is deep, profound, that affects people emotionally, not just conceptually.
Yeah.
To continue to do that, but also to extend our sense of legacy work that we do. That's become so important for both of us, I think, because we have children in those 20 years. that, and we have, older parents. We want to be able to not just connect our work only with the people who come to see this show at a certain age group, but to reach and to work with and to educate, but also to learn from
Sure.
people who are perhaps not in the spectrum of the usual people that come to see performances.
I couldn't agree more, actually. And in a way, that legacy is such an important thing, isn't it? This is the moment that we give back.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, this is a moment I also feel that we have a lot of influence.
Yeah.
And we have power, and we have privilege. And I kind of feel like this is a moment that we can't afford to be careless with it.
Yeah.
In the world that we're now living with, the situation with, identity and racial equality and, and environmental issues, I think now we've got to step up and challenge those on our own terms without getting political. And that's part of how we use our legacy. We use it, we can't be careless, we can take it forward. But I still think it's really important that we have to keep wanting to learn something new as we move forward. Yeah. And that means, and this is hard, you see this time and time again, don't you, where people have achieved a certain reputational value or standard, or they've achieved the gold standard of excellence. And then we almost have to destroy it to rebuild something new,
And when you know you want to learn something is when the project is being discussed, a fear creeps in.
Oh, yeah.
And then you know that you're in the right space.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more,
No?
And actually, watching you over the years, I think one of your greatest gifts is not your ability to create. I think it's your courage to destroy. Do you know what I'm saying? Is that, and as you've made work and you've made choices in your work, you often choose what you're going to leave out to define what you want to say. And I think that again is probably the next 20 years is about what bits of this can we leave out to create space for something new, right? Otherwise, we run the danger of repeating ourselves, or actually even worse, imitating ourselves as we move forward. And I think that's really, we have to just be careful with
Conscious
that.
of it.
Conscious of it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you know what? We know now, and that's a danger. Because when we started, we were fearless. We knew nothing. We were naive. And I often say, I really miss the beauty of being naive again. Not knowing and just kind of having an empty space in my head and trying to fill it with stuff.
But I remember you once saying to me that, which stuck with me for a long time, it's one thing when you find your voice, but once you find it, you have to then try to lose it.
Exactly. That is it. For reinvention, you have to lose it now. And this cycle, and again, you talk about it in work quite a lot. It's we are cyclical.
Yeah.
So as we create, we destroy. As we create, destroy. So I think we are now entering another cycle.
Yeah.
But to go into that cycle, we're going to have to destroy some stuff.
Yeah.
And that's going to be terrifying because now we're destroying stuff that we know has great value.
Yeah, and that has worked.
And has worked.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah, but that's what's exciting, no?
Well, let me think about it.
I want to aid you. Abraham. So, I want to aid you. God said. God said unto Abraham, And the Lord said, take thy son, take thy only son, Isaac, who I dost to love. Oh, let me go for down you. Wait, let me go for you. Stop. Kill him there upon a mountain and give him up to me. Abraham rose early and saddled with his donkey and took with him his only son, Isaac. Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father, here's the wood and the burning fire, but where's the lamb? We need for the sacrifice. 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 And Abraham said, my son, God will provide the land.
ITMO is an acronym for In the Mind of Igor, and that work was a response to The Rite of Spring, Stravinsky's great masterpiece of the early 20th century. The Rite of Spring was a piece that had really great disruptive force in its time, in both its score and its choreography by Nijinsky. So the word that became the foundation for ITMOI and the making of ITMOI, and was a kind of orientation for us in the creation and design, was rupture. And all I can say is, be careful what you wish for.
The dancers came from such diverse backgrounds, and of course my job was to ensure that their individualism stood out, but at the same time that there was a coherent collective voice that embodied Akram's voice through them. And so it became very clear to me that it was essential that we looked beyond the aesthetic framework of what his work was or is, that we had to really trigger the philosophical values, the cultural values, the emotional values that underpin his voice.
The research and rehearsal process for ITMOI had a difficulty and a darkness within them, which made it a really hard project overall, really difficult to navigate, and sometimes almost painful to watch, I think. ITMOI's got a ferocity. There's really nothing straight or polite or sane about ITMOI. And the process itself was also full of contradiction and tension. We spent a lot of time and a lot of sleepless nights trying to find our way through the complexity of all of the resources and the points of origin of ITMOI. There was lots of labour in trying to discover and release the impulses and the embodied experience of all the dancers.
I had a solo which I guess was the most physical solo I've ever done. I was already exhausted in the first 5 minutes. Akram really knows how to push your limits physically and really engage you as a personality, as a person, as a dancer, as an artist. So I really learned a lot to find many layers and depth in my character, in my dance, in my art.
When I came in to rehearse Itmoy, it was a learning process for me actually, because I began to develop a particular style of coaching that would be specific for Akram's work. In order for the dancers to reach the kind of state that they had to achieve by the end of the performance, their immersion and their rigor into the work was uncompromising, had to be uncompromising. And so I really had to develop a manner of sustaining a level of rigor throughout the process, throughout the tour, on a daily basis, because they were performing so much, that would get them used to emotionally and physically working at a peak consistently.
This team, the dancers were always full out. I mean, it was inspiring to see them really go for it, and everyone was so talented, and but also very different. And I guess we were able to kind of, support each other and push each other, and to see how far you can go, how physically stronger you can become, and how you can really play with that energy of exploding but also releasing at the same time.
We started with this image of a young woman being chosen and, in a sense, coached towards death by a charismatic older woman who intends to make her an object of sacrifice. But her intentions are blocked by the guardian of the young woman. So she manipulates the will of the mob and sacrifices the guardian figure himself instead. We began with images and resources in workshops. We brought an enormous stock of objects and materials together to see what movement responses they might yield. And we had this hat, this huge white hat that looked amazing on Catherine, but it was always getting in the way. We couldn't work out how to get it on and off stage without it looking ridiculous. And the hat, of all things, unexpectedly revealed its function in rehearsal one day when we'd struggled with it for a long time. Ching-Yin Chen, the disciple, was standing beside Catherine, who was wearing the hat. And just casually, Ching-Yin took the hat from Catherine and she put it on her own head. And there it was. There it was, the moment at which the disciple succeeds the master. The hat was a symbol of power, not an item of wardrobe.
And onto the lines, we have lots of bamboos in the piece. So as Shikandi, I'm kind of practicing with my weapon in one of the solos. So I've been preparing a lot in private for this role. So when I was at home in Berlin, I actually bought a bamboo stick and practiced in the parks during summertime. So I was, I guess, the only Asian person in the park with a bamboo stick and trying to make fighting moves in a weird way. Yeah, and I took it with me everywhere. Until the Lines was a very special piece for me. We were 3 dancers and 4 musicians, and the special thing about this show is that it's a 360 performance. So the audience is sitting around the stage, and the stage is a round tree trunk.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Turn. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, dig.
Hi Akram and the rest of the company. I guess the moment that really sticks in my mind in my relationship with the Akram Khan Dance Company was the first encounter really with the company in Sadler's Wells, and that was 0 degrees. You may remember that the premiere was planned for the 8th of July in 2005, and on the 7th we experienced the London bombings. And I remember that we weren't really sure what to do, whether to cancel or to carry on. So we did carry on in the end. And we didn't know if anyone was going to come, how they were going to get there. But of course, everyone came on bicycle, on foot, because London was closed down. The transport links were closed down, but they made it to the theatre. And then what they saw was an example of how art can bring people together at times like that and say something about our humanity. And of course the work itself dealt with issues of mourning, of how we deal with death, and it felt like a very, very healing moment and process. And so often in your work that's what happens, and that was just a really good example of how powerful art can be and how it can bring us all together and share in our common humanity. So thank you, and thank you for all the work you've brought to Sadler's Wells over the years. It's just a remarkable history, and we look forward to the future.
I first met Akram the summer he finished his studies at the Northern School of Contemporary Dance, and he tagged along with me not long afterwards as part of a research project I was doing in Freiburg, Germany. I used to spend a lot of time in Brussels then, and drink occasionally with Farooq Chowdhury, who was just coming to the end of his dancing career with the company of Anne-Theresa de Keersmacher Rosas. She had not long before established her school in Brussels Parts, which had pioneered a very new approach to a creative pedagogy of dance practice. And Farooq and I talked about Akram, and we conspired to get him a place on a 6-month course at Parts where he was up against the brightest and the best internationally. And while Akram was there that 6 months, he created a solo and a trio, which he then performed in a number of places, and it began to establish his reputation as a choreographer. Farooq, of course, went on to manage the work, and I wish them both really well with wherever it goes now.
Happy 20th birthday to everyone at Akram Khan Company, particularly to Akram and his long-term collaborator, Farooq, who both started the company together 20 odd years ago, and also to everyone else, both backstage, on stage and in the office. And it's been such a great privilege and honour to work with you, particularly over the last 10 years on pieces like Desh, Until the Lions and Xenos. And in fact I worked with Akram on a piece called Fix about 21 years ago, a solo commissioned by Dance Umbrella, and that was my first kind of encounter with Akram. And then we didn't work together through no fault of anyone's for about 10 years, and then the last 10 years has been fantastic. So here's to the next 10 years.
Hi there, 20 years, it's a baby company. So, short, 1 minute. 206, Sacred Monster, great experience. Challenging, fun, painful sometimes, but always great. Every performance, a bouffée d'air pur. That's another one for you, Akram. It means a breath of fresh air. And imagine that also, that's what I want to say, since 2006 I tried to make Akram understand the meaning of the word émerveillé. Still didn't get it, that's why I have so many white hair. Seriously, now we all are going to face a very tough time, and I think it's the mission of companies like your baby company to keep going and to show us day after day the beauty of life. I wish you all the best for that, because it's going to be hard, I think. But you are young and courageous and talented. So happy birthday, Akram Company.
tunna nakita tha dhatinta kir dhatinta kattita dhadinta kattita dhadinta kattita dhadinta 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 dhadinta kirdhe jijikita thei tram jijikita thei tram jijikita dhum dum
2 summers ago when Xenos premiered at Sadler's Wells, and there was a panel in Sadler's Wells that was curated by myself in a conversation with all of the creative artists on the production. A question was posed to the panel, not by myself, I have to add, because the question was around otherness, and the person who asked the question said, well, to some degree or less, would you not say that each and every one of us is the other, in some way or shape or form? And before I could sort of take a moment to register my own frustration with the question, Ruth Little, the dramaturg for the company, who herself is a white woman and who was answering the question, who was from a white person, really got to grips and got straight to the heart of the problem with the question itself. And what she said was that in posing such a question, what we are doing is we are diminishing and we're disregarding the discourse of power that is at the heart of how otherness operates and how othering operates. And indeed, we are kind of ignoring and erasing the dehumanization process that is at the heart of othering. Now, I bring this up because I think, for me, objectively speaking, what is at the heart of the othering process or the experience of otherness is this relationship between power and power structures and oppressive structures. And saying that, I want to acknowledge that we all occupy positions of privilege in certain contexts, and we all occupy positions of being on the receiving end of power in other contexts. So if I were to position myself in this conversation with regards to otherness, I speak from a place as an able-bodied, middle-class, caste-privileged, cisgendered, straight, immigrant, brown, South Asian woman living in the UK. I have a white Scottish-American partner, and we have a biracial Bengali Scottish-American daughter. I say those things because I can't divorce from those positionalities those bits in which I occupy dominant positions, and those other bits which make me at the receiving end of power. But there's something quite pernicious about how power operates in these discourses, and that's what I've been really interested in, which is often in my lived experience of otherness, where I am racialized as the brown othered woman, immigrant woman, it often operates in the guise of benevolence or curiosity, or from a place of trying to be nice, trying to be civil and good. And I'll give you some examples of that from living in the UK. So, for example, when I moved into our new home now several years ago, my new neighbor, a white elderly man, welcomed me to the neighborhood and flippantly added, saying, I really look forward to the fragrant biryani smells wafting over across your fence. To which I was quick enough to retort and say, well, I similarly look forward to the wafting of shepherd's pie across your fence. And so but I'm not always equipped to give those retorts. Another example, a white middle-class family friend who herself is a parent to biracial children of Indian heritage once asked me, have I ever considered whether naming my biracial daughter Hira, an Indian name, would be disadvantaging her, particularly in the Western context? Because I wasn't choosing to give her a Western name. A senior colleague in my professional context, a senior colleague in my first job once suggested to me that I might want to teach the sessions on Indian performance in a sari. So these are just some examples of, I guess, what is now termed as microaggressions or everyday racisms or otherness that we experience in the context of our lived realities in the UK for myself. But I do want to mention one thing, is that in all of the situations that I've described above, power firmly stays in place in favor of white Western dominant thinking, even as benevolence is somehow weaponized to cause this psychic social harm to the people who are on the receiving end of it.
Well, Royona, thank you for foregrounding the absolute importance of power in trying to understand otherness. A lot of your examples, Royana, you talked about are directly linked to a kind of diasporic reality, with neighbors across the fences talking about biryani wafting over the fence. And I live in a very different context, though I travel very widely. My location is in India, where I guess otherness gets marked primarily through caste. I think all of us are aware of this wonderful book that has been recently written by Isabel Wilkerson on caste, which she sees as the foundations of race. I think that's a very, very interesting kind of connection that is being made. So, sometimes we get locked in our own notions of otherness. We tend to think, oh, caste is only an Indian problem. And if you're not an Indian, you won't really understand caste. You won't really know what it means to be humiliated by caste. Many years ago, I was in Amherst at a very multicultural conference, and there were, my God, the widest diversity of audience that I've ever spoken to. Native American Indians, African Americans, Asian American, Hispanics, etc. Huge, huge diversity there. At some point, I mentioned the word caste, okay? And I felt some obligation to provide a short, explanation of it in the Indian context. And there were these loud protests from the audience saying, you don't have to do that. We know what caste is, And that really took me by surprise. And but in a way that is very heartening, when we are able to share across national borders different ways in which people get discriminated. It's not just my own discrimination. It's a discrimination that is shared by communities within my nation, within my country, but also across different contexts. So I find that very heartening. At all costs, I would say we have to avoid being othered. There are many ways in which you can be othered. For example, in my own profession as a critic, as a writer, as you know, I've been writing about, cultural appropriation and decolonial methods of dealing with oppression from the 70s onwards. And at some point, I wrote a very critical account of Peter Brook, his production of the Mahabharata, which I critiqued at many levels. I know that Akram was in that production and he had a different experience. And I realized that after writing that critique, I was being othered. I was being othered as a third world dissenting voice, okay? I was being put in that slot, and I did not want to be put in that slot. And I'm very, very, in a sense, happy and proud to say this. In 1986, 87, I was a lot younger. I did not fall into that trap. I did not just allow them to get me to say what they wanted to hear, I was not going to play that game. And fortunately for me, I returned to India at that point, and I had another journey, to follow. And it's another matter that journey of mine was of no consequence, but I felt I didn't want to be othered, as that third world dissenting voice.
Thank you, both of you. It's really interesting to hear other people's reflections on this question. I think my initial thoughts when I read the question or saw the question, what does the term otherness mean to you? My initial response was, well, nothing, because I never walked through my life thinking, here I am as an other. And I think that's what's really central to what otherness does to us, right? It makes us always have to see ourselves through the eyes of the self, which we can never access and we can never be. And I think there's something particularly violent about that when you don't necessarily have the language to articulate it, which for the majority of our lives. And so instead, we're not quite sure what this discomfort is that we feel. We're not quite sure what this smallness, I suppose, is that we feel. And so I guess the way that I think about otherness is that it's a method of reducing me from being the self which I am to myself. I am myself, into being always seeing myself through the eyes and the lenses and the gazes that are on me. And I think what that does to you as a young person, as an artist, as somebody growing up in a diaspora community in the UK, but as a person of color in a white supremacist nation state, which is, very much still is that empire that it always was, is that when you try to articulate yourself, I think you begin on the back foot because you are always speaking back to something. It never feels like you're able to begin the conversation. You're always responding to it. And I think that's it's difficult to convey the psychological mutation that comes with that, I would say. And when I think about art, which is perhaps the place where I have felt most able to resist that, it's what I kind of feel, or how I kind of would articulate that, is that being able to disrupt by purely speaking on my own terms is both something that's really difficult to do. I wouldn't say it's something I achieve, constantly in any way, but it's also something that feels really powerful, because I think I came to poetry through performance poetry, so slam poetry. And I think there's something about being on the stage, performing as a visibly Muslim woman that is ironic, because as a visibly Muslim woman, my walking through the world is performance, right? I am spectacle in this country wherein there is this gaze that is on me, that's always voyeuristic, that's always watching. What I would say the violence of otherness is to grow up never being allowed to see yourself through your own eyes. So the identities that you choose, the words that you choose to describe yourself, the questions that you decide to answer through your work or your research rarely ever come from an organic place, because you never get that space to say, well, who would I be on my own terms? What are my own questions? And I think it's interesting. I'm reminded of, I think it's Bell Hooks who writes about the margin as a vantage point. And that really resonated with me when I read that. Obviously, she was talking about the experience of African-American women, but I think in the UK context, if I kind of took that concept for a moment and extended it, I think people who are able to or have to occupy that space of being the other, you learn both to see the self and the other. And that's something that the kind of people who are benefiting from white supremacy or embedded in it don't have. And so if I was to kind of say that there is a way in which otherness is also something we can play with, that we can disrupt and we can kind of disorder, for me it's that we have experiential knowledge of the power dynamic that those who actually operate within it, I think, don't so much. And so what I mean by that is, through my art, what I feel is really exciting is being able to reveal to those who other me that is the process that is happening right now. I am only other because you have decided you are self. And I am very invested, I think, in that dialogue, because what I think that does is it shows that actually this boundary between self and other is arbitrary.
I'm very drawn to the question of power that was being spoken to by Royana and Rustom. I think with the fragmentation of centralized power, particularly with the nation state, with strong governments, we see an attempt, almost a panic to kind of stimulate a sense of power devolution among various groups and tribes. The great challenge for democracy then is basically a politics that purposefully instigates power implosions everywhere, even as it begins to be tentative about the power it actually has and actually owns. We see that in the fragmentation of politics everywhere. There's a wonderful essay written by the great Polish journalist Ryszard Kapuscinski, and he talks about the idea of otherness as being rooted in a very deep pathological need to fear, simply because we find it very difficult to contain multitudes, and have done so all this while. We have a particular problem in Southeast Asia, and that is my lived experience, of course, and very closely related to politics. Southeast Asia very much resembles or is very symbolic or emblematic of essentially how bastardized and chaotic the world in essence is. it still remains a highly primordial culture. As Southeast Asian nations, some from a revolutionary basis, others like Malaysia from a kind of peaceful transition to a nation state, have tried to give meaning to the idea of nation state by very clearly categorizing and segmenting its cultural reality. That has gone on for about 50 years, 55 years, been influenced by all kinds of different ideologies. And as Southeast Asia starts to open up with creating necessary ideological connections with the world, they have been struggling essentially with what is essentially the messiness or the difficulties of their own cultural pluralities. Terms like multiculturalism don't work in this region. I'm very drawn, as much as I wrestle with him all the time. I remember what V.S. Naipaul said about the idea of British multiculturalism, and he called it a kind of barbarism, just too simplistic and fitting people into neat categories all the time. It's a problem that we're facing here, and I think one of the principal problems that Southeast Asia has is a reflection or a refraction that comes from this idea of otherness in what is a very messy cultural landscape. That is a kind of puritanism that creeps in. And there has been now the great fear in many Southeast Asian societies of their own other, the other of their own shadows, or their own histories, and that a process of cultural cleansing has to take place. Hence, this very legalistic sometimes, and very highly political, sometimes even violent reactions to cultures within their own realities. So the need to suppress, for example, different influences, the proscription and banning of ritual theatrical forms in the northeast Malaysian state of Kelantan, in various parts of Indonesia, by Puritan forces who want to reimagine a new idea of their own culture. So this question of otherness has become increasingly complicated, and kind of transcends easy binaries of identity politics, of East and West, of Muslim and Hindu, of Islam and Christianity, and started also to ameliorate and permeate the very self of individual communities themselves, whether we are Muslim enough, whether we are Christian enough. And I think one of the problems that we are having now in a world that is very galvanized by all kinds of activism, and this is the last point I make, is I think we are struggling with language. Enough of a language to philosophize about these very deep wounds, in living in a social media dominated reductivist culture. I think this is becoming an increasingly difficult problem of grappling with all these layers and all these complexities of otherness, as we have termed it.
Being Black and being an American, it's very layered and conflicting at times. When I think of the term otherness, I think of exclusion. My experience of being in a predominantly white field as a classical ballet dancer was that throughout, the beginning years of my professional life, I was the only Black woman in my company for over a decade. And I was told that I was shown and made to feel that I was other. I was told I didn't belong. But at the same time, once I persevered, I became a principal dancer. That otherness, I think, was seen as monetary value to the company. And so it's this conflict of, is otherness individuality? Do I celebrate what they have coined as otherness? And, I think that I tend to see a beautiful silver lining in a lot of things, and kind of taking that separation and how they've separated me from, what a ballerina should look like. And I've made that a positive thing. And I think that by being on the stage and by having a presence and having a voice, a lot of young people looking at me have taken that otherness and seen it as a positive thing, that being an individual is so important, especially in this day and age. But it is such a huge conflict within myself of owning that, or am I taking that? Is it being exploited? It's a very complicated thing in America, because I think that when you look at pop culture, that's all people are attempting to be, is other and an individual. But at the same time, there's so much negativity that comes with that. So, for me, I think in America, in order to make positive out of this opportunity that I have, is to own what that is. And to me, that's being a unique individual and feeling comfortable with being the only in my field, and kind of celebrating. I think when I think about, and it's going to be provocative, but when I think about the term nigger, and I think how Black people have used that word and owned it and made it their own rather than it owning them, I feel like that's how I've taken that otherness. My response of this moment, Black Lives Matter, really being under a magnifying glass. It's an experience that all Black people, no matter where you are in the world, are experiencing and have experienced. And so, it has been extremely taxing. It's been emotionally exhausting and frustrating, on one end, because this is a conversation that we are all having internally. We are attempting to have externally in the most acceptable, digestible way. And that's kind of been, the only way to have the conversation actually take place is not to be too provocative and have to exist within these confinements of how you talk about race and racism. But this, to me, it's an exciting moment. It's an exciting moment. Throughout my 20-year career at American Ballet Theater, I have had these conversations very openly. So I think that my dialogue and my voice has not changed, but it's the first time that I feel I'm being heard. It's difficult sometimes to swallow when I've had these conversations very clearly, one-on-one, whether it was with my artistic director or my colleagues or people within the dance community. And now that we're having the conversations, it's as if they've never heard anything that I've said. But I think that this moment, because of COVID and because of being in quarantine, it's really just allowed people to stop and feel what it feels like, I think, to be isolated, to feel what it feels like to not have a voice. And that has been the Black experience for forever. And I think that's why people are really kind of absorbing this moment and understanding. And it couldn't have been a more perfect time, this kind of perfect storm of this moment. But I think that my place and my position is that it's not for me to scream louder. I think I've been screaming loud about this issue my entire career and my life. So I think right now, if anything, I think it's my responsibility to empower other young Black dancers, minority dancers, to feel that they too can have a voice, and that I shouldn't be the only voice for our entire race as a dancer. And so I feel that is where I stand, and it's an amazing feeling knowing that I had so many mentors before me who did the same. And so I feel like that's my responsibility at this point.
That's really useful to hear, Misty. I think it's interesting as well because being obviously across the ocean, in the UK, I feel like the impact of seeing the kind of revolutionary moment of this summer was deeply politicizing, I think, for a lot of people, especially a lot of young people in the UK. And I think that cut across a lot of the usual kind of divides, I think, because it was so explicit. The violence of the state was so unhidden. And I think that's been really useful in some senses. On the other hand, I think there's a real lack of infrastructure here to kind of channel that energy. And that scares me a little, because what I see happening is the co-option of what Black Lives Matter means. And I think what a lot of the danger I've seen happens very quickly. So, one of the most exciting things that happened in the UK in response to Black Lives Matter was the tearing down of a statue of a slave trader. And that may have been symbolic, but I think what it really spoke to was a larger feeling that we will acknowledge the past of this country. And I think, not acknowledging it is one of the kind of bastions of the reason for the violence that people of color face in the UK today and at the border of the UK. So that was really exciting. But then I think what it turned into was, okay, so you want us to remove all the statues. Cool, no problem. And like a managing to just flatten what this movement is about. And, the same thing I think then happens with online. You were seeing people posting Black squares. And I know that began in the music industry with a kind of very purposeful meaning behind it. But what I saw happen was well-meaning people, well-intentioned people posting these Black squares very meaninglessly. And I think the thing that I really feel worried about is that this gets very individualized. So I think there's a sense that Black Lives Matter, but as individual lives, without a kind of context in which structural white supremacy and state violence and histories of it exist. And so what that translates into is, Black Lives Matter, but let's keep funding the police, let's keep building the surveillance apparatus. And, Britain is steeped in the security industry. It's a security industrial complex that we live in here. And I think it's one of our most lucrative exports, whether that's CVE, and in Minnesota, where you had like these, initial protests happening, is where the Somali Muslim Black community have been facing they've been the guinea pigs of some of the most insidious intelligence gathering surveillance operations in the US. So I say all of that just to say, I think it's created a politicization, an awakening, a real galvanization of activism. But I worry about the direction of that activism, because I think that there is always this threat of the radicalism of those movements, the horizon of the criticism just being limited and being kind of drawn back to just, let's arrest the policemen.
One of the things not to do is to scream louder. Because I think the movement, essentially rooted in very needed ideas and renewed ideas of social justice, is really suffering from that thing we spoke about, language. Beyond the gestural, beyond the hashtag, beyond the appropriation of this or that symbol, I'm waiting for another Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, written with that kind of eloquence. And let us not underestimate the importance of eloquence. I do not see parallels in the language, and I think I could even safely say the convictions of the civil rights movement of the 1960s emulated in the Black Lives Matter movement. I think we are very jaded when it comes to actually articulating very deep thoughts about how we respond. I was, of course, observed. I've studied in Britain for almost a lot of my adult life was spent in Britain. This questions of struggling with British history in particular are not answered simply by the removal of the statue. What happens to history? And there is very little discussion post the removal of the statue. And there is a lot of undulating into a certain kind of madness about the things that people can do and cannot do, which has now given birth to a kind of culture of patronage, so that we have to start retitling the books of Joseph Conrad. We have to censor Dante, and all for the privilege of Black and brown people who really have no problems reading these texts in the way they have been written. So I think there's this sense of self-satisfaction and self-gratification with making these very little gestural things, like removing statues from one place and putting them in another, does not enable us to really address the historical and cultural issues that lie behind many of these things. In an age of reductivist language and our inability essentially to grapple with very complex, deep and complicated ideas.
It's one thing to remove the statue of a slave owner. It's quite another thing maybe to remove the statue of Gandhi, and everybody is entitled to a critique of Gandhi, and certainly the worst thing you can do is to sanctify him, to make a Bapu out of him, a Mahatma out of him. But maybe just knocking Gandhi down, the statue, which he himself would like to knock down, and I would imagine, because he hated those kinds of emblems, those icons. I think I'm not against rage, and I think there's a place for rage, and rage maybe cannot always have a very eloquent articulation, because if you're mad about something, if you're on the street, maybe that's not the time for eloquence, I would say. But I would certainly want a discussion, a debate, and a kind of serious, engagement with all the contradictions that go with, let's say, tearing down the statue of Gandhi, And I think that if we just privilege that short-term gesture and we do not do the hard work of thinking it through, then maybe, as we were talking about earlier, this rage can just evaporate, or it can be appropriated, or, it can be trivialized, And that should not happen. There's a need for critical debate, deep need for critical debate. We can't shy away from that, And yes, sometimes it's not possible for that debate to be handled with reasoned disagreement in a liberal mode. It's precisely working against the liberal mode, but trying to find another way of thinking contradictions through, not settling for easy, binaries, just knocking something down, praising something out. That is not going to help the struggle in the long run. That's what I feel.
Where the line is between what we were talking about earlier, kind of the way otherness is used to police us, essentially, but then also where we begin to play into that. And I think there is also a caution, I feel, that we must be cautious around replicating a respectability politics, which actually just justifies us being policed. And I think, I wonder what it means for us to kind of feel that I understand the sentiment that rage alone is not enough. And of course, rage alone does not change the world. But I also wonder, for whom is it easy to say that, and for whom is it difficult? And for whom is it possible to become eloquent on the terms of our rage, and for whom is it difficult? And I think if we start imposing these kind of boundaries or kind of conditions upon which we are able to call for freedom or justice or liberation, there will always be people who must wait, because you simply have to wait for liberation then if you're not able to sort of frame it the right way. And I'm also reminded of, Black revolutionaries who always said that, and I think it's true, and I think, this echoes the point that Misty was making about not screaming louder, that liberation doesn't, it's not about the way you present the oppression to the oppressor that liberation comes. And I think it's in fact about taking it the other way and taking it sort of into our hands. And I think that I'm often kind of find myself reflecting back on Audre Lorde's essay, "The Master's Tools Will Not Dismantle the Master's House," because I wonder, what tools do we have that are not the Master's tools? And I think when we think about language, as a poet, as a writer, that's something I think about a lot. Do we have language that is not the Master's language? How do we develop language that is not the Master's language? Are we wrong to consider that language is, in of itself, something that brings down the master's house? Which tool have we even identified? Which of the tools are the master's? Which are our own? Can we remold a tool? Can we denaturalize the tools? So I think I just wanted to kind of put those set of provocations out there too, because I think it's important. I think it's important in the context I live in, specifically just because I know that many of the people who are most marginalized are also deliberately deprived from the tools of sort of, speech or articulation or understanding of our material conditions of oppression. So I noticed that people of color in the West are exhausted because we're educating on the one hand, educating on the other, explaining ourselves, explaining our reasons for revolting, explaining our reasons for being angry, then explaining why we're angry in the ways we're angry, explaining how we explain our anger. And it's this never-ending cycle. And I think it reminds me of Toni Morrison when she says, they will say you have no history, so you spend 20 years proving that you do. They'll say your skulls are too small, so you spend 20 years proving that they are. And then 40 years have gone by. And, I think that's something that I'm interested in, because I think in a politics of refusal, which is kind of where I place myself and where I place Islam as well, refusal to kind of adhere to the norms that are surrounding us, just because they sort of state some ostensible authority. I think the question I'm now turning more, or kind of finding myself asking, is if I'm constantly refusing, what is it that I'm turning to? And that place, I think, is becoming easier to imagine with the work of young Black revolutionaries who are doing abolitionist work. And I think I would say as well, like, just to kind of inject the earlier conversation, that there are really brilliant conversations happening amongst, really new thinkers and new ideologues, I would say, across the world. And I think a lot of those voices are belittled as sort of, young activists, and therefore, they don't really have any experience, or they're not particularly published or whatever else. But I think there is where the action is happening. And to me, I take great inspiration from those people.
I feel like I'm invisible and see-through. I feel like no one is seeing me, they're ignoring me. Like, I feel like I'm not powerful, I'm a small. I feel like I'm vulnerable.
I feel unseen because, do you know that feeling when you just feel like you have this kind of thing that people get to know you? I feel like they just took it away from me so that I could be quiet and be unseen.
I feel like I don't even exist. I feel enraged because they just reject me over and over, and it gets annoying.
I feel insecure because people look at me like I'm an ugly goblin, and I feel like I don't have an identity.
আমি ধরতে পারলে মন বেড়ি দিতাম পাখির পায় কেমনে আসে যায় খাঁচার ভিতর অচিন পাখি কেমনে আসে যায় আটকুঠুরি নয় দরজাটা মধ্যে মধ্যে ঝরকা কাঁটা আটকুঠুরি নয় দরজাটা মধ্যে মধ্যে ঝরকা কাঁটা তার উপরে সদর কোঠা তার উপরে সদর কোঠা আয়না মহলতায় কেমনে আসে যায় কপালের ফের নইলে কি আর পাখিটির মন ব্যবহার কপালের ফের নইলে কি আর পাখিটির মন ব্যবহার খাঁচা ভেঙে পাখি আমার খাঁচা ভেঙে পাখি আমার কোন বনে পালায় কেমনে আসে যায় মন তুই রইলি খাঁচার আশে খাঁচা যে তোর কাঁচা বাঁশে মন তুই রইলি খাঁচার আশে খাঁচা যে তোর কাঁচা বাঁশে
It wasn't clear at all who will become which role. So Akram was very open in the beginning. So we really just played around. We've been reading the story. We've been improvising a lot. We've been learning choreography. We have taken lots of katak lessons.
I think one of the most difficult things with Until the Lions was to find a place where the work that had such complex mythological subtext to it could on one level reach an audience that had no idea of the mythology of the story, and on another level that would touch people who had a lot of knowledge and a lot of understanding of the story. So I think Until the Lions was really about finding a universal truth that would touch, that would create an experience that was universal, so that Amba didn't just become a mythological character. Shikanti was not just a character, but one found the human connection to those women.
Shikanti is a woman who will transform into a man and into a warrior, and only as a warrior he will be able to kill Bhishma and take revenge. Starting with this innocent child that is born that actually has the soul and memory of Amba. She feels that there's something inside of her, this inner force that's trying to push her, and she knows that she has a role and a purpose in life. This story really gave me so much power and motivation to create my version of Shikanti.
It's the combination of everything. It's the combination of our gifts and the desire to dig and call something bigger than us that creates something quite unique and special. I think that what we created with Akram, it's an engine room of its own. We did blur the line of commission, collaboration, ownership. When I enter this space, I feel that I'm entering a sacred space, and I like to treat it as a priest. And what I mean by that, I am serving. I am serving a vision that it's not necessarily Akram's vision, but it's a vision that it goes beyond all of us.
I remember in rehearsal I've been running on all fours like a dog kind of, and I remember that when I was a child that was like my way of moving. I really enjoyed running on all fours, and I always tried to be as fast as I can. And I just did that in rehearsal, and Akram said, "That's great, I want to take that. Can you do that 4 rounds around the stage?" Like then I've been running a lot in the piece. But for me, that represents the hunt, the search for Bhishma.
Joy has this amazing physical range that is able to be tremendously open, tremendously diverse in her sense of movement and articulation, and very, very precise. But at the same time, that physical range could easily become a point of ease that would limit us from experiencing the tension and the rage underlying Shikanti's character. And so for us to really experience that, she had to push herself constantly to a level of discomfort, and she had to convince and trust herself about that.
I was also trying to have different emotions in the physicality of an animal, but then also switching into the human body. So there's a lot happening mentally, physically, and it is a challenge to really push that bar every time in every show. I really learned through this process and through performing the piece that the exhaustion really takes you to a place of honesty. It really inspires me how Akram asks questions, and during the process and research, it's not that he has all the answers, and he really is honest about that. And I think each individual can dedicate their artistry and propose things, and he's very open to it. But in the end, also, he really knows what his signature is and how he includes his roots and the Kathak and his story and philosophy into his work. And I learned a lot from him, but I'm also able to express myself in a way that makes me who I am as a personality or dancer. I really appreciate that you get a lot to learn, but you're also able to give and share.
The others are not working for their own agendas ever. They're not pushing anything that comes from their own pure interest. They are all at the top of their game. They are all masters of their craft, and they are constantly, relentlessly serving the piece. It's almost like we all become one body. I think it's incredibly powerful that Akram has the ability to create this space. Because as creators, we are all very sensitive, we're all very fragile. And to be able to be so open and allow every other soul to bring their power into it, it requires a lot of strength.
Akram, what an amazing thing to have been part of the early story of your dancing development and life. I can remember when we met just outside the Royal Festival Hall, and at that time you were thinking, well, I seem to remember of a tree and hanging from a tree, but that isn't what happened. And I think what was amazing about the whole evolution of 0 Degrees was how you made your personal experience somehow everybody's. I think that you have an extraordinary mixture of discipline and openness. And I think that's what's carried you and all your associates forward. I can just remember you, just saying that every morning for 2 hours maybe, you would practice katak in your mum's kitchen. And I sort of feel that that was the foundation of everything that happened since. We love you, Akram. We love everything that you've brought to the life of dance here and all over the world. It's been a pleasure to work with you, to know you, and to watch the effect of your extraordinary energy and inspiration, and how that's irradiated all of our lives. Carry on.
It was Akram Khan himself who introduced me to modern dance. To my shame, and subsequently I've discovered my great loss, I hadn't shown much interest in the form to date. So I went to see him at Sadler's, and I was hooked. Like many late converts, I became a bit of a zealot for his work. I've seen every piece he's done since. And we met and talked about doing a huge piece for the Olympic opening ceremony, for which I'd been appointed artistic director. So we had this brilliant space and opportunity, and an incredible platform for him and his work, but we didn't have an idea yet. The Olympic opening ceremony is a weird mixture of national showcase, high art, showbiz, and rampant corporate opportunism, for which I knew Akram would be an antidote. So I'd imagined him dancing alone if necessary. Such was my growing deification of the man. But then he ruptured his Achilles tendon. Now, I knew this was serious, but until I told one of the other choreographers in our team and saw just how white his face went, he said, "We're 6 months out. He'll never recover in time, Danny." But recover he did. And of course, he not only adjusted the performance to absorb the problem, but he made it the idea. Mortality. How it will always accompany us, how God will always laugh at our plans, and how we rise and respond to it. Thank you, Akram, and congratulations on 20 wonderful years of the company.
Congratulations, Akram Khan Company, for 20 years.
Congrats. My name is Aditya, and I'm the vocalist on Xenos.
And I'm Maithili, and I'm one of the dancers in Outwitting the Devil.
I'll go first since I met Akram by first, and I was really happy to meet him on the New Parks Festival in 2016, I think. He was touring Toro Baka, and I was on tour with my band, and I had heard a lot about Akram Khan through my sister, who was a big fan, and I'd never seen his work, or I hadn't met him, but just being around him, I felt some sort of like an intense inspiration, just talking to him and definitely watching Toro Baka, and then seeing some of his lecture demonstrations he did while he was on tour. I just felt like I wanted to be around him. I wanted to ask questions. And he was just so open to having a dialogue with someone who's so much younger and so much less experienced, and he just had such an open dialogue with me, and I found that so beautiful and inspirational. And I was lucky that he asked me to tour with him on Xenos shortly after that, and we've been touring for the last 2 years, and we're waiting to get back to it, hopefully very soon.
And Aditya always tells me how lucky I am that he introduced me to Akram Khan.
That's right.
And it's true, actually. When he was touring with him in the Park Festival, he said, you admire Akram so much, why don't you just write to him? And I did, and Akram was immediately so responsive, so encouraging of, again, like Aditya said, somebody so much less experienced than him. And it was just so inspiring. He invited me later that year to be a part of a festival he was curating, the Darbar Festival, and just over the course of time, he's kind of become a mentor figure to me for the past few years, and then invited me to be one of the dancers in Outwitting the Devil. And just the process of being part of his process, being part of a process with somebody whom I look up to so much, has been amazing. The touring with Outwitting the Devil, the process has been amazing.
Yeah, and something I've really gained from these years with Akram Bhai and the company is seeing how he finds artistic fuel in every like interaction in his life. And it's not just about the music or the dance. It's about he would find inspiration in Netflix. And I remember once we were on a train going to Toronto from Ottawa. It was a 3-hour train journey, and I think we were all pretty tired. It was an early morning train, and I walked by his chair, and he was on his laptop watching Hasan Minhaj's Netflix special. And in my head, I was like, oh, finally, he's just taking a break and just relaxing and watching some good old entertainment. But as I was talking to him about that special, I found out that it wasn't a break for him. He was using it as a learning experience. He was observing how Hasan Minhaj's body language would change when he would tell certain jokes. He was just watching every little detail, and it's really inspiring to be around someone who finds so much inspiration in life around him, because it really opens up our possibilities to find that for ourselves as well.
Yeah, same. It opens your mind up so much to be around somebody who's like absorbing everything around them. And even for us, what was really beautiful, I thought, for me, was the creative process of creating Outwitting the Devil, because he would come into rehearsal every day, having gone through footage, stayed up all night watching footage of rehearsal, but also we would have conversations about what's been happening in the world, about everything that's sort of been feeding that moment in time. And for sure he would have had a conversation with the Uber driver or the taxi driver on his way to rehearsal, and that for sure would have fed into, his thought process. And so it was really beautiful, I think, just to see how an artist's mind is so open to absorbing everything, and that finds its way so beautifully and so organically into his work.
Absolutely.
So that's we've taken so much from that, I think.
Yeah, and I think another thing he does so beautifully is make all his collaborators feel so comfortable, welcome, and in this very beautiful creative space where all we have to do is just be. We don't have any other distraction, and I think that's also that attitude has also trickled down into the company itself, and every member of the company makes us feel like we're part of the family. And I don't think it's never felt like a company. Yeah,
it's always felt so much like a family. We feel so much love from literally every single person. And for me, I've been away from my kid, from my family, touring, and to be honest, don't tell them, but I don't feel like I'm away from home. I feel very much like I'm with my family.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. It is our second family, and we're so grateful to be a part of this.
Absolutely honored.
Any funny anecdotes?
I have an anecdote. We have a lot of amazing experiences together. I have one that doesn't make me look very great, but it was before the premiere in Stuttgart. Premiere of Outwitting the Devil. We had all been away for 2 weeks or something before we had come together to make the last minute kind of tweaks and changes before the premiere. And I was asked to stand in for Jimmy for one part where he's supposed to be dead and he's on the floor. And so I had no problems laying on the floor and taking a little break. But because I was jet lagged, I think I dozed off a little. And when I woke up, I had Akram towering over me being like, "She's asleep!" And he said, never in the 20 years that I've run this company has anybody fallen asleep during one of my rehearsals. Yeah. And so, I was very honored to have been the first one to do so.
Yes. And never in my 2 years, except for this one day that I'll tell you about, have I heard Akram really raise his voice. He's always kind of very even-keeled, composed, collected, calm. at least in my opinion. I don't know if other people would disagree with
Love
that.
to ask you, Go.
Yeah. But there was this one specific performance where my dressing room was right next to his, and usually mine is the farthest from his because I have a loud voice and I do my warm-ups before the show, so I think he purposely creates that space between us, which is fair enough. But this one, I was right next to him, and after the show, from his room, I heard a lot of yelling and a lot of F-bombs being thrown, and I was really surprised. I didn't know if he was just pissed off with the show or like what happened, but later I found out is from Maupetit that he was taking his ice bath. And I guess that's when you can really hear him get really pissed off is in that ice bath.
The post-show moments.
Yeah, and another amazing post-show moment, there's many of them, but is getting dinner with him or getting a meal with Akram Bhai is just the best because he orders everything on the menu and he usually finishes all of it.
Yeah, and we're always like, oh my God, you're gonna order that too, but you know.
He shares it, we get a little bit of everything, so it's just such a fun experience, touring, traveling, and being a part of the AKC family.
It's been amazing. It's been such an amazing experience for both of us. We're so honored to be part of this company, part of this family, and we look forward to the next 20 years together and
we'll be making
more.
Another one of these on our 40th, on the AKC 40th.
AKC 40th, yeah. So for now, we'll wish AKC a happy 20, and thank you so much for making us a part of your amazing, amazing family.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Bye.
One of the parameters that we're very aware of is the form itself.
Yeah.
And the form is a vessel.
Yeah.
And for us, if it's immersed, we feel it is universal, it goes beyond the form. And we are very fortunate, both of us, to have seen and witnessed and experienced other artists who have gone beyond the form where you forget that the flamenco dancer is actually doing flamenco, even though it's flamenco.
Yeah.
It goes beyond that. And that was our entire aim. Use your form, but it's not the form that you're showing. It's how deep you work within the form, where it reaches a place where you go, that's not any more specific, it is universal.
Yep.
I think we both came to a place of really feeling a sense of responsibility as well, in terms of if the two of us as senior artists, if you like, were in a position to guide in some way, because at the same time we have always said it's not completely our jobs. We have our own responsibility to our own art. But there does come a time when you feel a sense of duty to a new generation of artists. How do we support and guide them into a particular direction of working that is best going to help them develop a particular sense of intelligence into working with their practice as Indian classical dancers, having a conviction with their form, and then being able to apply that into a rigor and a practice that can sustain them through a journey professionally, in this case.
Each session has been so impactful, but it's also been so rigorous and tedious. Every minute we're constantly challenged and failing and deepening, and it's like tiny grains of sand that are being stacked up. So it's such a slow and languorous process, but I think for me that's been very challenging, but also extremely inspiring, and to really push out everything else and just be present.
This kind of immersion, I like the word immersion rather than surrender, because I know that my ego is not non-existent, and surrender requires that sense of non-existence of ego. So I like to use the word immersion. And I think this kind of immersion and detailing, every little bit there's an intention. It's not, oh, we just do it, or we've learned it, or we do it well, or we just turn, or we just stamp. No, there's a reason, and there's an intention, and there's a depth to it, which has been fascinating.
I really like being pushed, and we try to push ourselves when we're in our own practice, and both Mavin and Akram have said this, it is very solo practice. Whether you're choreographing on people or on yourself, it is very lonely, and you can push yourself only so far. And so I think having class, doing new rep that is completely outside of my comfort zone, but also understanding the process that goes into that choreography has been really intense.
Both Mavin and Akram have been telling us in the different sessions, so whether it's with our classical technique of how we need to really hold on to that and to push with rigor, and how can we take responsibility of our own voice in Indian classical dance, but then also in different aspects of it, whether it's abhinaya, more expressional part of dance, how can you go deeper in that, and how can you build a greater narrative within the Indian classical dance form itself, so that you've got a clear intention of why you're doing something, and it's not just because someone's taught you or because it's traditionally done in a certain way.
Coming here and listening to people talk has really validated what I was doing in a way, and really given me a way to keep going, in the sense that, like I said, it gave us the words. It's describing what I'm doing or what I want to do, and it doesn't sound crazy anymore, so I think that articulation of what my goals are has really been eye-opening for me.
I think what's very particular with Akram and I, which is why our relationship is very, very deep, I think, is that we both share a truly great sense of belief in rigor and in an immersion into something of the unknown, which we don't know what the answer is. So the conviction to immerse and just trust that through that rigor over a period of time, something will reveal itself. We have both shared this, I think, from the time that we first met.
Rigor and rigor is just kind of a buzzword right now for all of us, because it's so intense and so unyielding, and I think that's amazing to see, because you always think you're working hard and then somebody's working harder. So to keep pushing and pushing and pushing to your limits, I think is something that I will definitely take back. And also I think to allow myself to really immerse myself in what I'm doing and to really believe it, because it's easy to believe a story of something, but it's not easy to actually embody it and take it on like it's yours. And I think that's a really, really hard process. And I'm hoping to try that, and I'm sure I'm gonna fail, but I'm gonna keep on trying. And I think that perseverance is something that I'll also take back.
The process element has been very crucial, that we're not here to teach either a piece of repertoire that they take away with. We're not here to give them a formula really that can be used by everyone, but we're just sharing with them really the manner in which we approach work from a process perspective, and hopefully with that their eyes open up into possibilities.
Because the experiential element is spirituality. It lies in spirituality.
Yeah.
At a certain point it becomes spiritual, and in a sense Indian classical dancers, it's part of their culture. It's a part of the myths that we study.
Yeah.
The first thing I was taught in class was not the steps, but was to do pranam, touch the floor, touch your guru's feet, say thank you to this space, which is like a temple. So just by acknowledging the space being a temple, you're in a different space.
Yeah.
Although I'm skeptical about rebirth, I feel an ancient connection to Akram and Farouk. And it could be because who they are as human beings and their deep connection and immersion in dance. Also, how they have impacted and inspired my dance and my life. With Mavin joining the company, it has added special colors to our relationship. So fly, AKC, to the edge of time and space, to the edge of creativity and imagination, to the edge of passion and abandon and love. And I know you can do that because your feet are firmly planted on the ground. So lots and lots of love and all the very, very best.
I send my greetings and congratulations to Akram Khan on the celebratory occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Akram Khan Dance Company. The world of the arts has been privileged to see Akram's profuse creativity. We have seen the work of an exceptional artist, a brilliant mind, and an extraordinary dancing body. In my own personal journey of dance, I have learned that technique disguises the dancer and reveals the dance. This is the magic. And dance at its deepest levels, at its core, at its essence, is a moment of lived experience, a moment of truth.
process is about all the conversations that we have, all the storytelling that we are digging into, even the things that will never make the final cut. The whole process is informing the creation of the various aesthetics, which then becomes a whole. The battle scene in Xenos is a very good example of this creative process. The entire vibe of the piece, but that scene in particular, was intense, heavy and dark. And the music was carrying this energy, but the melodic element of it had something that was almost comic. There was an element of lightness on top of it, which for me was a way of mocking the military elements. We were all interested in this contradiction. However, it wasn't working. And funny enough was Michael that very clearly at some point said, nope, doesn't work, guys. Like, I love the piece, I appreciate what's happening here, but it doesn't work. And he was right. We were able to create a space where someone was safe enough and open enough to say, from a non-composer's perspective, this is not right for the piece. This is not serving what we're looking for. The morning after, the music came, and it was completely different, completely unexpected, perhaps melodically even more challenging than what was before. It was what it was meant to be.
The battle scene in Xenos is probably one of the most relentless sections, solo sections for any dancer. And in order to reach the kind of exhausted state of that soldier by the end of it, there was no other way to achieve that but to push the body to that point of exhaustion. I remember being quite demanding on Akram. At the end of the section, there are about 3 to 4 times that he has to fall to the floor and pick himself up. And of course, like any dancer would, like any intelligent dancer would, there would be times when he would try to economize the number of falls that would happen. And I remember saying to him, pushing him, that he had to do at least 3 or 4 of them, because if he didn't, the state of exhaustion wouldn't be total in its honesty. There had to be no sense of authority, there had no sense of strength in his body at all. In essence, he had to really let go of his ego completely and allow us all to see him at his most vulnerable.
Throughout the process, Akram was really following Peter Brook's guidance that movement must come first. That the moment you try to express an emotion, you're really only imitating it. Instead, by entering into a physical state, the feeling will follow. And that means staying with the myths, the dreams, and the characters, and the situations, and trusting that rehearsal and repetition and pushing ideas to their edge to find what they can sustain will help to clarify your intentions and give form to what's essential. And they will, but not necessarily in the way that you might have imagined, and not necessarily until the very last minute.
We can come in with certain ideas, with certain elements taking us on the journey. But the truth is, none of us know until the end, really. We want the piece to tell us what the piece is.
As we were approaching the first previews of Outwitting the Devil, Akram pulled me to a side one evening and he said to me, there's a problem in that the piece is not landing emotionally and it's too impressive. And what he meant by that was that however physically exuberant the body can be, however, as in his words, impressive the dancing can be, if there isn't that point where the story emotionally lands and touches the heart of the audience, it then just becomes an impressive exercise, an impressive vehicle. I remember him kind of collecting the whole creative team and really discussing this really as a point of urgency and a necessity for the work to achieve what it needed to achieve beyond the kind of virtuosity.
Me personally, it happens every time that we work with Akram, and I take it with me outside of that space. There is a constant reminder of looking at the heart of everything and really go deep. It's a challenge. It doesn't happen naturally, but it's a process that is constantly there, is constantly evolving. As the pieces evolve, this means that what we create is never really finished. I'm in awe every time I see a piece 6 months later, or even a year later, or 2 years later. The piece is alive of its own, and usually it grows, it becomes more alive, and it's a very powerful experience, and I think it shows honesty.
I think spirituality means making choices and having freedom.
I feel like
spirituality is like magic, because it feels like your God is like within you, is like right next to you. It reminds me of like the wind and voices and like what happened in the past. It reminds me of magic because when you pray to them, it feels like you're actually talking to them, and when they listen to your prayers, it feels like magic.
The spirituality that I have, it reminds me of a turtle dove. It reminds me of peace and love. It's like, it reminds me of peacefulness, and it makes me feel at home.
God to me is like stars in the sky. They shine really bright and they guide me to where I need to go.
Maybe I'll just begin by recounting a little bit of the understanding that comes of what is God from the point of view of the hunter-gatherers that I've been working with. And in order to understand that, it's quite important to just create or to explain a little bit about the contrast between people who live by hunting and gathering. In India, you have some of the jungly people who are famous hunter-gatherers. In Indonesia, there are fewer groups, but of course you have the Penan. In Malaysia, you have a lot of the Batek and other groups who are still hunter-gatherers. But this remains a very marginal form of life, despite it being the dominant form of life for most of human history. And it's why it's something that's not so well understood. So the Neolithic revolution, in contrast to what had gone before that, when people were hunter-gatherers and could freely collect whatever foods they needed without any dependencies on other people, this was a profound shift in human history. And as soon as these hierarchies and inequalities started to develop with the Neolithic, so did new ideas of God. And in particular, the punishing or bitter, moralistic, patriarchal God, which is very familiar in the dominant religions of today. And indeed, of course, in many of the great religions of the past. The Greek pantheon with Zeus at the top is a classic example. But there's a sort of reflection of society in these sorts of gods, in that they are part of the legitimation of the often very extreme powers that patriarchs or other leaders of these communities held. Now, by contrast, in these egalitarian hunting and gathering societies, there is no book, there is no scripture or set of moral warrants that adherents have to follow. Rather, there is a performative element to how people experience the divine. And in the context of hunter-gatherers, the word God is not really appropriate. What they have are creators, or a creator, not particularly interested in what happens in creation today, though we'll still watch and participate from time to time. But is essentially leading an idealized version of the worldly life in their own place, in a very similar environment to the one in which the people inhabit. So essentially, in these hunter-gatherer groups, religion is not focused on the worship of God. It is focused on the worship of nature, in the sense of the life that inhabits the environment around us. And so their modes of dancing and singing are specifically geared towards communing and communicating with that greater person, the forest around them. So this, in a sense, is the essence of religious experience for humanity. In all these hunter-gatherer societies, ritual is not a procedural process led by a priest, or an officiant. It's something which the whole community participates in as song and dance. So song and dance really is at the heart of what it means to become human. Now, that may well be the case for these hunter-gatherer groups living in very small communities in remote parts of the world. But clearly God has become the tool of all societies in their efforts to manage, control, and describe what is the ideal form of life. And that is, of course, problematic because what works for one may not work for another. And so what I was particularly interested in is how the idea of God, or the word God itself, is used in your context, Ayu.
When we talk about the problem of God, I want to focus on the use of violence in settling differences of interpretation. Yeah. And I tried to do some research on when was the first time there is a religious conflict and the use of religious violence. I didn't find texts, I didn't find the usage of violence to settle religious problems before 16th century. So it is before Islam and colonialism and Christianity came in Indonesia, we didn't find a story or a history about the use of religious violence. So this intolerance or the use of religious violence started with the coming of monotheism and the coming of colonialism. And I think textuality or literacy create another problem, which is we started to categorize, or we started to make a fixation of concepts, and we lose the fluidity of our experience because we want to put things into dogmas. And I think that's make the difference, a big difference between local religions or local spirituality with formalized religion. And especially with monotheism, because they are very obsessed with orthodoxy.
The problem here, as Ayu also pointed, is in the idea called language. When we are making language as an enterprise to kind of define this, we have found out a word, or we have kind of coined, there's a coinage called God. That itself is a problem. It is very logically reasoned out that one can also get away without God, especially when it's coming from Buddhist point of view and Jain point of view. But what's so interesting is everyone were searching for some principle of origin and principle of ordering, and we're also searching a space which is not here, but can we go beyond this, beyond the obvious kind of. In one way, on a very broader sketch, this search of the constituents of reality, and whatever we call as the atomicity of it, the granularity of it, can we attribute a name to it? Can we attribute something else? Can we retain it as just as an idea, or we want to make it far more rigid, far more conceptualized? As you also pointed out, that categorization, or if you want to call it as putting them into something called universals or particular instances of life, are we going to achieve it? Are they only means to a bigger end? In its experience, through working out through art, which is a very private engagement, can I erase these borders? Can I erase this bigotry? Can I identify something far more deeper? And this search, in my opinion, is still continuing. We are trying many, many ways through language, through writing, through our actions, through our, I mean, all of us would also agree that society itself is a great imaginary space. And art is also another imaginary space working within society or parallelly. Nevertheless, the idea of particle, the constituent particle, if someone wants to call it as God, they are welcome to name it. but that still remains an enigma.
I mean, this idea of fixity, I think, is really important, and one issue you've both raised very clearly, that when we start to fix religious doctrine, it not only becomes much easier to manipulate and control others through that fixity, but it also makes sure that at some point it will become irrelevant. And as it becomes irrelevant, it tends to promote increasing confrontation with those who question the relevance. And one of the very interesting things about all the great religions is how much, because they are written, we can see how much their interpretation is changed by different generations. And the use that politicians constantly put religious understandings to in trying to foment conflict or to increase control and management of people. But I think what you've just raised there, Jayachandran, which is very interesting, is that there is a freedom beyond that duality. And it is, as Ayu was saying, it is really at the level of aesthetics, of beauty, that freedom starts to emerge, because all of us can experience beauty without the in-between state of a priest or someone telling us how to experience it. And certainly in my brief experience with Advaita Vedanta, one of the philosophical traditions of India, is that dance is the highest form of art precisely because it has no duality. There is no artifice. The dancer is their own artifice. And it's that unity of purpose and experience. The aesthetic that it may be to watch a dancer is also an aesthetic that's experienced by the dancer. And indeed, it is in that moment of experience of the bliss of joy that the divine enters.
But actually, I perceive dance as an audience, when I see dance, it's not just the moving body which I am looking at. The way the body is sculpting the space around it, henceforth, it speaks a completely different semantics to me. Many a times, dance, the interiors of a dancer's body is hollow. It's actually hollow. Body becomes very transparent. So much of training goes to make body lose its opaqueness, and the ultimate point becomes body when it becomes transparent. At that level, anything and everything kept under the slide reflects through the body, or comes out of the body. To that level, it becomes like a very interesting hollow tunnel. Anyone wants to witness through the body what's happening. It's like knocking into someone's private space. Suddenly the private conversation becomes very public, and everyone takes interest in this nature of beauty. You know, that beauty is suddenly what is very living in the inner recesses of the mind. Someone is trying to open it to everyone and inviting everyone to watch it. At that level, all of the viewer there who are watching this particular I would rather say, I don't want to call the word mystery. Rather, it seems seemingly mystical thing. That the belief on that moving body becomes far bigger and says, this body can tell me something far truer, something far stronger truths can be said out of the body, just by mere motion, just by mere movement. This is saying something far deeper to me. The entire thing, what they put forward, is not necessarily godly, but certainly it is divine. It is certainly sacred, sacrum. As you all know, the word sacred also comes from the word sacrum, or something from which it is risen from, especially the tailbone, the sacrum, from very, very base, something is raising itself to reveal very, very high. It is sacred, but certainly that space is a divine space. The time is divine. At that level, space can fold itself, time can fold itself. And interestingly, a lifespan or a life story of someone who have lived some 50 to 60 years or 70 years or 80 years of their life can be said conveniently in 3 minutes can be completely truncated. And convincingly, everyone lives those memory instances. Within the 3 minutes, the entire 70 years is transcended by the audience. And to me, in my understanding, this experience of going trans-temporal and trans-spatial is shedding body. Everyone wants to shed the body, purge the body, and go against the physical reality of time and space, or the actuality of time and space.
It's fascinating to imagine if everybody can dance and everybody can have this transcends or ecstatic feeling through art. But I want to underline the our modern situation in which the presentation of art in the urban and modern world is not sacred anymore, because we lose the sense of sacredness, and we present art, we present music, we present dance as performance. In festivals, it's no longer a religious festival or spiritual festival, but it's just an art festival. How do we experience this beauty, this transcendence? If we lose the sacredness, because it's no longer part of our everyday life. I think I want to underline the modern problems and situation, and I think that's also the reason why we in Indonesia, we tend to, not only in Indonesia, I think also in India too, we tend to lose our capacity to experience the transcendence. And I want to go back to the experience of Indonesia. Yeah, I think we lose this. I agree completely with the two of you that music and dance is part of the medium or the practice, the habit that we can understand the transcendence without conceptualizing it. And if we can understand it through our experience, to our rasa, not with our concepts, we can be fluid. And if we are fluid, we have the fluidity, we became more tolerant. We don't become very dogmatic or fanatic. We started to lose our, what the Japanese called the rasa, because rasa is intuition, is emotion, in which you don't need text to understand things. How do we bring back the transcendence in the modern situation?
So I think that really dance remains such an important preoccupation for human beings, precisely because it offers us that pathway, that ancient pathway to experience the divine. And so while hunter-gatherers may seem irrelevant, I think that the principles that they have found for human bodies to feel complete are still very relevant to us today, and remind us of the importance of partying, of taking time out from productive activity to just experience and rejoice in being alive, in the extraordinary miracle of our very existence, something that I feel is often overlooked. But so, I think the technologies of joy and those various technologies of joy are something that people are still very preoccupied with. And so there is always hope for humanity, as long as we are seeking out spaces to rejoice, to lose ourselves, to really become one with those around us.
Antariksham Shantihi Antariksham Prithvi Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Sama Shantir Edhi Om Shanti Shanti
When someone engages physically with the body, when the search, as Jerome was mentioning, that there is this hollowness people are searching for, even the urban crowd, the urban youngsters are searching for. And suddenly their lives are entirely reverted back. All the invested education, years and years of schooling and everything, By the end of it, what they get is only to get a better house, that's shelter, to get better clothing and better food. Now, actually, the mind is yearning for something else. It is a hollowness. It's absolutely hollow. It has not been attended to, rather not tended in any instructional material. No one has speaking about it, even at home, and anyone within the. But everyone are yearning to come together to find that hollow space, that hollowness. The body is wanting to get hollow. The idea now is, can we do something else so that we can get hollow? Hollow is achieved by engaging body. The body has to be engaged in such frenziness that suddenly even headbangs can help us, and something else. Now the question is, what happens during this activity when you raise the breath and when you engage a body in a particular kind of activity? Body starts sweating. The sweat becomes the jewel of the body. It's the pearls, which is more or less the result of the effort. And metaphorically, in most of the language, we know world across, sweat is equated to effort. Sweat is metaphorical to effort rather than the fruit. The fruition, it's not about the activity, the fruit of the activity, rather the effort taken, the process. While sweat slowly, makes someone actually talk within themselves, make it very hollow. Actually, sweat, anyone who's playing, anyone who's with martial arts, anyone who's dancing, cannot be disturbed by, because they're sweating, they're breathing. Breathing and sweating entities suddenly catapult into another zone. When you're sweating and breathing, the normal norms of life cannot disturb us. At this moment, one starts tasting a very recessive level of sacred space. And no one wants to give it up. Wants to engage itself one after, and suddenly, whatever is felt by a sweating body becomes truth. Suddenly, there's a sense of truth being felt in it. I mean, it is also said the human body has 7,000 pores in the ancient texts, especially related to body, when it comes to tantric rituals, and medical texts. When you start sweating, they say the body is exerting arrows out of the pores of the human body. Sweat is a proof for the effort, and don't wipe it off, rather dab it, absorb it, so that it can be invested back in finding something which is not physical. There is a trance body, which she is just trying to identify. As Ayu has mentioned, that such findings of yesteryears was actually not for performativeness. No one wants to perform it for others. Performativity of art has completely ruined this idea of internal search of the sacred space. Performance is more to do with exhibitionism. Anything done as a work of art, anything done as a work of realization is termed to be meant for exhibitionistic view. But more importantly, more so ever, we have come to that phase of the world that we have to turn back and look inside, that anything we do is not for others, but primarily to engage ourselves, to live with ourselves. There is no more conflict within to live with oneself. Rather, urban times have become so difficult that one doesn't want to live with oneself and want to live with something else beyond, even with a gadget or with a social media, want to keep always smiling. But to live with sweat, to live with breath, to live with body, to live with dancing body, where everything can become transparent. And if someone has tasted it, someone has tasted the rasa of it, someone has tasted the essence of it, someone absolutely becomes uncontrollably addictive to it and wants to go back to that zone, that sacred zone, again and again and again.
To live with sweat
to live with breath, to live with body, to live with dancing body. There, everything can become transparent. And if someone has tasted it, someone has tasted the rasa of it, someone has tasted the essence of it, someone absolutely becomes uncontrollably addicted to it and wants to go back to that zone, that sacred zone, again and again and again and again and again and again. Stop. We are in the midst of a seismic change. And so I feel this may be an opportunity for all of us to collectively unearth our past. A past that we may have buried away in the earth and in our bodies. Always silently hoping that this past remains in the past. Stop. We must collectively unearth our past. Stop. A past that we have buried away in the earth and in our bodies. Stop. Silently hoping that the past remains in the past. Stop. So much of the past is still rooted in separation, neglect, hope, fear, denial. Stop. To look back at the past needs courage. Stop. We are in the midst of a seismic change, a moment where we are forced to stop traveling, to stop moving, to stop connecting, to just stop. But stop doesn't necessarily mean stop. I would like to believe it just means pause.